Family betrayal hits hardest at midnight. I'm Tom Bradley, and after 35 years of banking, I thought I knew the meaning of trust. Then I heard my own daughter-in-law planning to destroy my career while I stood in my kitchen, invisible in my own home. The early retirement package is perfect, Caroline whispered into her phone. Stress-related leave, then consulting role. He'll never see it coming. Steve's finally on board. By Christmas, the old man's gone, and I'll have my VP position. The old man standing 3 FT away from her. She wanted me gone. She'd built her promotion on my forced retirement, used my grief over Margaret's death as ammunition. I set my water glass down silently. Sometimes the prey becomes the predator. What Caroline didn't know could fill volumes. But what she was about to discover would destroy everything she'd worked for. You know what they say about underestimating quiet people? You're about to find out why that's a fatal mistake. Hit that subscribe button. This story gets wild, and I want you along for every shocking twist. Here's how one overheard conversation triggered a professional earthquake that left careers in ruins. The signs had been there for months, but grief makes you miss things. Since Margaret passed 3 years ago, work became my anchor. Maybe that made me an easier target. Caroline joined Piedmont Regional Bank as Director of Human Resources 2 years back. MBA from Duke, sharp suits, always talking about modernizing our approach. At family dinners, she'd make comments. Dad, you work too hard. At your age, shouldn't you be thinking about slowing down? Steve would nod along. Caroline's right, Dad. You've earned some rest, but I wasn't ready. Banking was all I had left. The first real incident happened in October. I walked into conference room B for our monthly loan committee meeting. Caroline was there, clipboard in hand, talking to Richard Hayes, our bank president. Tom, Richard said, looking uncomfortable, Caroline thinks you might benefit from stepping back from the Morrison account. Stress levels. You know, the Morrison account. 23 years I'd worked with Jim Morrison, built his construction business from a $50,000 line of credit to a $4.2 million relationship. Stress levels. I kept my voice level. Caroline smiled that practiced HR smile. We're just concerned about your well-being. Tom, these large accounts require fresh energy. Fresh energy code for you're too old. I'll manage the Morrison account, I said. Of course, Caroline replied, but I saw her make a note. The second incident was worse. November 8th quarterly performance reviews. Caroline called me into her office. All glass walls and modern furniture. Her Herman Miller chair probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. She slid a folder across her desk. Your review, Tom, I opened it. Resistance to change initiatives. Difficulty adapting to digital platforms. Concerns about energy levels. Energy levels. There it was again. Who wrote this? It's aggregate feedback from colleagues. Her voice was smooth, professional, but I knew my colleagues Richard Hayes had worked with me for 20 years. Janet Walsh, our operations VP, still asked my advice on complex loans. None of them had issues with my energy. Which colleagues? That's confidential, Tom. HR policy. I set the folder down. 35 years of clean reviews, and suddenly I'm a problem. But here's what Caroline didn't know. I'd started paying attention. Real attention. That night, I pulled my phone records. Caroline had called Steve 17 times in the past month. 17, they used to talk maybe twice monthly. I opened my laptop and did something. I'd learned from Margaret during her cancer fight. She taught me about documentation, about keeping records when people try to control your narrative. I started a file. Caroline pattern recognition. Every meeting I was excluded from. Every account that got redistributed for efficiency. Every comment about my age disguised as concern for my health. The pattern was clear. Caroline wasn't worried about my well-being. She was positioning herself for my job. But she'd made a crucial error. She assumed that a 62-year-old widower would go quietly. That grief had made me weak. She was about to learn the difference between quiet and weak, because while Caroline was playing corporate politics, I was remembering something she'd overlooked. In 35 years at Piedmont Regional, I hadn't just built relationships with clients. I'd built something else. Something that would make this whole situation very interesting. But first, I needed evidence. Real evidence. The kind that holds up in boardrooms and courtrooms. Caroline wanted to play. Games. Fine. But she was about to discover that experience. Beats ambition every single time. Let me explain what Caroline's little scheme would cost me. Because when you understand the numbers, you understand why staying quiet wasn't an option. First, the immediate hit. Forced early retirement at 62 meant a penalty on my pension. $280,000 gone. Just like that. The system punishes you for leaving before 65, and Caroline knew it. But that was just the beginning. My loan portfolio, the accounts I'd built over 3 decades, was worth $45 million to the bank. $45 million in active lending relationships. When those clients heard I was gone, how many would follow me out the door? Caroline thought she could just redistribute my accounts, hand them off to younger loan officers with MBA, degrees, and digital native credentials. She had no idea that banking isn't about spreadsheets and algorithms. It's about trust. Jim Morrison wouldn't work with some kid fresh out of college. Neither would Elena Rodriguez, who'd expanded her medical practice from 1 location to 7 with my guidance. Or the Thompson family, whose agricultural operation I'd financed through 3 generations. These weren't just accounts. They were relationships. 35 years of handshakes, late-night calls, and standing by people when other banks wouldn't. But Caroline saw numbers on a screen. She thought loyalty was outdated, old-fashioned, something that could be optimized away. That's where she miscalculated. See, there's something else Caroline didn't factor into her timeline. The Christmas bonus structure at Piedmont Regional. If she could force me out before December 31st, she'd be positioned for promotion to senior vice president. $85,000 salary increase, plus performance bonuses tied to loan portfolio management. She wasn't just stealing my career. She was stealing my relationships to fund her own advancement. Then there was Steve, my son. Watching him nod along with Caroline's concerns, seeing him avoid my eyes during family dinners, that hurt worse than any financial penalty. Margaret and I had raised him to be honest, to have integrity. But Caroline had spent 2 years whispering in his ear, convincing him that his old man was stressed, overworked, potentially making poor decisions. Dad needs to enjoy his golden years, she'd say. He's given enough to that bank. Golden years, like I was some broken-down horse ready for pasture. But here's what really made this personal. Caroline had started spreading concerns about my judgment to our clients. Subtle questions during bank events. How do you think Tom's handling the stress of recent changes? Have you noticed him seeming tired lately? She was poisoning the well systematically. Elena Rodriguez called me the week before Thanksgiving. Tom, someone from your HR department asked about our satisfaction with your services. Is everything okay? That's when I knew. Caroline wasn't just planning my exit. She was building justification for it. Creating a paper trail that would show the bank had legitimate concerns about my performance. The mathematics were simple. If I stayed silent, I'd lose my pension penalty. I'd lose my relationships. I'd lose my reputation. And I'd lose my son's respect because he'd think I went quietly into that good night. But if I fought back, that was riskier. Caroline held the HR authority. She could document any conversation we had, frame any resistance as proving her point about my stress levels, unless I had something she didn't expect. Which brings me to November 16th, the morning after I overheard her midnight conversation. I made 3 phone calls that morning. 3 calls that would change everything. The first was to Margaret Chen, our chief legal counsel. Maggie, I need to understand something about employment law, hypothetically. The second was to my old friend Larry Peterson at First National. Larry, who'd been trying to recruit me for 15 years. Larry, that offer you mentioned, tell me more. The third call was the most important to a number I hadn't dialed in 20 years. Hello, Sharon. It's Tom Bradley. I need to discuss my shareholding position at Piedmont Regional. Yes, it's time to make it official. Because here's what Caroline never knew. What no one at the bank knew except the original founders and the legal department. When Piedmont Regional went through its reorganization in 1989, certain longtime employees were offered the opportunity to purchase founder shares. Not many people had the cash or the confidence to invest their life savings in the bank, where they worked. I did. 35 years of steady purchases, small amounts, never enough to trigger disclosure requirements. Never enough to attract attention, but enough to matter. Enough to change everything. The first was to Margaret Chen, our chief legal counsel. Maggie, I need to understand something about employment law, hypothetically. The second was to my old friend Larry Peterson at First National. Larry, who'd been trying to recruit me for 15 years. Larry, that offer you mentioned, tell me more. The third call was the most important to a number I hadn't dialed in 20 years. Hello, Sharon. It's Tom Bradley. I need to discuss my shareholding position at Piedmont Regional. Yes, it's time to make it official. Because here's what Caroline never knew. What no one at the bank knew except the original founders and the legal department. When Piedmont Regional went through its reorganization in 1989, certain longtime employees were offered the opportunity to purchase founder shares. Not many people had the cash or the confidence to invest their life savings in the bank, where they worked. I did. 35 years of steady purchases, small amounts, never enough to trigger disclosure requirements, never enough to attract attention, but enough to matter, enough to change everything. Caroline thought she was playing chess with an old man who didn't understand the rules. She was about to discover she'd been playing checkers, and I owned the board. November 17th, I decided it was time for a conversation. Caroline's office. Glass walls, expensive furniture, and that confidence that comes from thinking you hold all the cards. "Tom," she said, looking up from her computer. "What can I do for you?" I sat down across from her desk, opened my notebook, the one I'd been keeping since October. "I want to discuss my performance review. Of course, I understand you might have concerns." October 12th. "You removed me from the Morrison account meeting. Reason given: stress management." She nodded. "We discussed this." October 18th, "You redistributed the Henderson loan to Mark Stevens. Reason: fresh perspective." "Tom, I'm not sure where this is going." November 1st, "You excluded me from the quarterly planning session. Said I needed work-life balance." Caroline leaned back in her chair. That practiced smile. "Tom, these decisions were made in your best interest." November 8th, "You documented concerns about my energy levels based on colleague feedback." "That's correct. Which colleagues?" "You know, I can't share that information." I turned a page in my notebook. "Richard Hayes. I asked him yesterday. He said no one contacted him about my performance." Her smile flickered just for a second. "Janet Walsh, same answer. Said she'd be happy to provide a reference anytime." "Tom, I think you're misunderstanding. Mark Stevens, young man you gave the Henderson account to. He told me something interesting." I let that hang in the air. Caroline's confidence was starting to crack. "He said you asked him to document any conversations where I seemed confused or overwhelmed." Exact quote. "We need to build a case for Tom's transition." Caroline straightened in her chair. "I never said that. Mark has excellent notes. MBA training, very thorough documentation." She was quiet for a moment, calculating. "Tom, I think there's been a misunderstanding. My job is to look out for everyone's well-being, including your own." "What's that supposed to mean?" I closed my notebook, looked directly at her. "Senior vice president position opens up if I leave before Christmas. $85,000 increase, plus bonuses tied to loan portfolio management." Caroline's face went pale. "You think this is about money? I think this is about opportunity. My opportunity becoming your opportunity." She stood up, walked to her window. When she turned back, the practiced HR smile was gone. "Tom, you're 62 years old. You've been through tremendous loss. Working 70-hour weeks isn't healthy at any age, but especially not now. So this is medical advice. This is realistic advice. The banking industry is changing. Digital transformation, automated lending platforms, data analytics. The skills that made you successful 30 years ago are outdated, are different from what we need now." "Different how?" "Tom, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. Answer the question. Different how?" Caroline sat back down, leaned forward. "Fine. You want honesty. Your approach to client relationships is inefficient. You spend hours on phone calls that could be handled with email. You resist our new digital lending platforms. You question every process improvement we implement. I question processes that don't work. You question processes that threaten your control." The room went quiet. She'd said too much, and she knew it. Control over what? Your little kingdom. Your special relationships. Your irreplaceable status. I smiled. Actually smiled. Actually, because Caroline had just made this very easy. Irreplaceable. "Tom, no one is irreplaceable. Not in modern banking." Interesting perspective. I stood up, picked up my notebook. "Caroline, I appreciate your honesty. Really, it clarifies things." "What does that mean?" "It means we understand each other now." I walked toward her office door. Stopped, turned back. "One question. When you called Steve 17 times last month, did you discuss his inheritance planning?" Caroline froze. "How did you—" "Phone records publicly available through the family plan billing." "That's private." "Family conversations about moving Dad to a retirement community, about managing his finances when he's no longer competent, about the burden of caring for aging parents." "Tom, you're twisting." November 15th, 11:43 p.m., you were on the phone with someone discussing my early retirement package. The timeline, how I'd never see it coming. Caroline's face went white. That's impossible. You weren't even home. I live there, Caroline. It's my house. She sat down hard in her chair. You have excellent soundproofing in the living room, but the kitchen shares a wall. Sound travels. Tom, whatever you think you heard was very clear, crystal clear. I opened her office door. Caroline, thank you for this conversation. It's been illuminating. Where are you going with this? I looked back at her, sitting behind that expensive desk surrounded by glass walls, realizing that her perfect plan had a witness. I'm going to do what 35 years in banking taught me. Document everything, verify sources, and make very careful decisions based on facts. Tom, please. We're family. Yes, I said, we are. I left her office. Walked past the cubicles where junior loan officers pretended not to watch. Past Richard Hayes' office where he gave me a questioning look. Caroline thought she understood the game, position, politics, leverage. But she'd forgotten the most important rule in banking. Always know who you're really dealing with. That afternoon, I made a trip I hadn't made in 15 years. Downtown Charlotte, First National Bank Building, 23rd floor. The offices of Henderson, Walsh and Associates, the law firm that handled Piedmont Regional's original incorporation. Sharon Walsh met me in the lobby. 20 years older, silver hair instead of brown, but the same sharp eyes that had negotiated our founder agreements back in 1989. Tom Bradley, I wondered when I'd see you again. Her office was old school. Wood paneling, leather chairs, law books that actually got used. No glass walls, no modern furniture, just solid, permanent things. Sharon, I need to discuss my position at Piedmont. She pulled a file from her cabinet, thick, bound in blue leather. I've been wondering when you'd want to make this official. Make what official? Sharon opened the file. The original incorporation documents, shareholder agreements, purchase records dating back 35 years. Tom, you own 19% of Piedmont Regional Bank. I nodded. I knew the number. Most people don't realize that makes you the second largest individual shareholder. Most people don't need to know, but some people do. She looked at me over her reading glasses. Especially people who think they can force you out. I told her about Caroline, the performance reviews, the excluded meetings, the midnight conversation. Sharon listened, made notes, asked careful questions. Tom, what do you want to accomplish here? I want her to understand that actions have consequences. Legal consequences or professional consequences. Whatever consequences fit the actions. Sharon pulled out another folder. I've been tracking Piedmont's HR policies since Caroline arrived. Some interesting changes. She handed me a document. New performance evaluation criteria implemented 6 months ago. Notice anything? I read through it. Age-related language. Subtle but consistent. Energy requirements. Adaptability to change. Long-term career planning. All phrased to sound neutral, but designed to target senior employees. Is that legal? It's borderline. The implementation is what matters. If someone's using these criteria selectively, then we have options. Sharon leaned back in her chair. Tom, I have to ask, why now? You could have disclosed your shareholding position years ago. Made yourself untouchable. Because I never wanted to be the guy who hid behind ownership to avoid accountability. And now? Now someone's trying to destroy my reputation to advance their career. That's different. Sharon nodded. What about your son? That was the hard question. The one I'd been avoiding. Steve doesn't know about the shares. No one in my family knows. Margaret knew, but she's gone. This could complicate his marriage. His marriage is already complicated. He just doesn't see it yet. Sharon made another note. Tom, if we proceed, there's no going back. Once you reveal your ownership position, everything changes. Your relationship with the bank, with your colleagues, with your family, everything's already changed. I'm just catching up. She smiled. All right, here's what we'll do. For the next hour, Sharon outlined the legal framework. Shareholder rights, board notification requirements, documentation standards. The key, she said, is timing. You reveal your position at exactly the right moment, maximum impact. When's that? When Caroline makes her next move. And trust me, she will. People like her can't help themselves. They always overreach. I left Sharon's office with a briefcase full of documents. 35 years of stock purchases, legal opinions, shareholder agreements, but more than that, I left with clarity. Caroline thought she was playing a game where she held all the power, where HR authority trumped everything else. She had no idea that the quiet, old man she was trying to push. A site actually had the ability to reshape the entire bank. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in months. I arrived at work early, not because I was stressed or overworked, because I had work to do. Real work, the kind that would teach a very ambitious young woman the difference between position and power. December 1st, quarterly client appreciation event. Piedmont Regional's biggest social gathering of the year. 200 clients, employees, community leaders, the kind of event where reputations are built or destroyed. I should have seen it coming. Caroline had been quiet since our conversation. Too quiet. In my experience, when ambitious people go silent, they're planning something big. The event was held at the Charlotte Country Club. Caroline had organized everything. She did excellent work. I'll give her that. Perfect details, smooth logistics, impressive presentation. I was working the room, talking with clients I'd known for decades. Jim Morrison was there with his wife, Sarah. Elena Rodriguez brought her practice manager. The Thompson family drove in from their farm. Good conversations, strong relationships, the kind Caroline thought were outdated. Then Richard Hayes stepped to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight. Before we conclude, I'd like to address something important. The room went quiet. This wasn't on the program. As you know, Piedmont Regional has always been built on relationships, personal connections, trust developed over years of partnership. I felt it coming. Whatever Caroline had planned, this was it. However, as our industry evolves, we must sometimes make difficult decisions about staffing and leadership. My clients were looking at me now. Confused expressions, worried glances. It's with mixed emotions that I announce Tom Bradley will be transitioning to a consulting role effective January 1st. The room erupted. Not applause, shocked murmurs, angry voices. Tom's dedicated 35 years to this institution. Richard continued reading from prepared remarks. He's earned a well-deserved rest. Jim Morrison stood up. What the hell does that mean? Transitioning. Jim, please. Tom's the best banker in the city. Why would you force him out? Elena Rodriguez joined in. This is ridiculous. Tom's helped me build everything I have. Richard looked uncomfortable. These weren't his words, and everyone could tell. The decision has been made with Tom's best interests in mind. His health, his family situation. That's enough. My voice cut through the noise. The room went silent. I walked to the front, took the microphone from Richard. Thank you, Richard, but I think there's been a misunderstanding. I looked out at 200 faces. Clients who trusted me, colleagues who'd worked with me for decades, community leaders who'd seen me build relationships one handshake at a time. I haven't agreed to transition to anything. Caroline was standing near the bar. Her face had gone pale. In fact, I haven't been consulted about any changes to my position. Jim Morrison called out. What's really going on here, Tom? What's going on? Jim, is that someone decided my 35 years of experience was less valuable than their 2 years of modern thinking? I looked directly at Caroline. Someone decided that loyalty could be optimized away, that relationships were inefficient, that clients like you would be just as happy, working with junior staff who understand digital platforms better than they understand people. Elena Rodriguez stood up. Is this about age discrimination? That's a strong accusation, Elena, but let me share some facts. I pulled out my notebook, the one I'd been keeping since October. In the past 8 weeks, I've been excluded from 12 client meetings, told it was for my own good stress management. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I've had 3 major accounts redistributed. Clients I've worked with for over a decade, again, for my own benefit. Jim Morrison's face was red with anger. Who made these decisions? Our Director of Human Resources, Caroline Bradley. All eyes turned to Caroline. She stepped forward that practiced confidence back in place. Tom, this isn't the appropriate venue. You're right. The appropriate venue was a private conversation, but those don't seem to work. Caroline smiled for the crowd. Tom's been under tremendous stress since his wife's passing. We're simply trying to support him through a difficult transition. Stress, I repeated. Interesting diagnosis from someone with a business degree. Tom, please. Tell me, Caroline, when you called my son 17 times last month, was that part of your professional assessment? The smile disappeared. I don't know what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. I opened my notebook to a specific page. November 15th, 11:43 p.m., you were on the phone in my living room discussing my early retirement package with someone. The timeline, how I'd never see it coming.